Rain hammered the docks, turning the concrete black beneath dying floodlights. It is a harsh truth that sometimes the people who break us are the very ones who teach us how to survive. Amidst rusted shipping containers, trauma nurse Selena Valls found the eastern seaboard's most feared mafia boss bleeding out. With trembling hands and a fading flashlight, she saved Massimo Duca. Hours later he would sneer, "I would never touch a woman like you," in response. Selena left behind an ultrasound photo and vanished with his unborn child. But to understand how they got there, we have to rewind to that storm. The rain fell in sheets so thick she could barely see 3 feet ahead. Water soaked her scrubs as she crossed the yard. Her medical bag resting heavy against her hip, a physical reminder of the burdens we all must carry. A grueling 12-hour shift at the refugee center had left her bag stuffed with empty morphine vials that rattled with every step. She never should have taken the shortcut through the docks. But her apartment was 2 miles away across streets that turned ruthless after midnight. It is a cruel irony that our shortcuts often lead us straight into the storms we try so desperately to avoid. Thunder cracked overhead, causing the floodlights to flicker into a sickly yellow glow. Selena kept her head down, splashing through dark puddles, until a sharp, final gunshot split the air. Desperate shouting erupted in Italian. Every survival instinct she had screamed at her to run, but her feet stayed planted. Another shout echoed, followed by the wet, sickening sound of a man choking on his own blood. She gripped her medical bag before she could even fully process the danger. She knew she should run, but 6 years in war zones had completely rewired her. When a true healer hears a fading life, the drive to act silences the instinct for self-preservation. She ducked between the containers, chasing the echoes through the heavy rain. The storm turned the steel maze into a blur of shadows. Suddenly, flashlights pierced the gloom, illuminating a man lying in a growing pool of blood. 8 armed men stood in a tight circle, their expensive suits ruined by the downpour. They gripped their weapons tightly, yet every single one of them looked absolutely terrified. The bleeding man on the wet concrete wore a tailored suit likely worth more than Selena made in 6 months. His hair clung to his skull, his face twisted in pure agony. A wound just below his heart pumped blood with every erratic beat. "Someone do something," a man shouted. "We move him. He dies," another argued, trapped by their criminal ties. Calling for an ambulance simply wasn't an option. It's a tragic human flaw that the fear of making the wrong choice often paralyzes us into doing nothing at all. As the dying man's lips turned blue, Selena knew she could easily walk away. Instead, she stepped into the blinding circle of light. "Move," she demanded, causing 8 guns to instantly swing toward her face. Her heart pounded violently, but she kept her hands visible. "I am a trauma nurse," she stated evenly. "If you want him to survive the next 10 minutes, you need to step aside." For 3 agonizing seconds, nobody moved. An older man with a scarred jaw barked a command and the weapons lowered. Selena dropped to her knees, the rain instantly soaking her clothes. He was roughly 35, his face gray from blood loss. Suddenly, his dark eyes snapped open. Even at death's door, a predatory sharpness remained in his stare. A person's true nature never hides when they are stripped down to their final breaths. He tried to speak, but blood bubbled past his lips. "Do not talk," Selena ordered, pulling gauze and a penlight from her bag. "This is going to hurt worse than getting shot. Try not to pass out." Moving with mechanical precision, she packed the wound and applied fierce pressure. She searched blindly in the torn tissue for the bullet, but it was buried far too deep. The slug had missed his heart by 2 centimeters and lodged against the bone. The man's back arched violently as a guttural sound escaped his throat. "Hold him down," Selena snapped. "If he moves, he dies." 3 enforcers immediately pinned his limbs to the wet concrete. The heavy rain made everything impossibly slippery, washing his blood away. She desperately needed a sterile hospital. But life rarely gives us the perfect conditions to do the right thing. We have to build our miracles from the dirt we're handed, driven by pure muscle memory. She worked faster. She refused to let him die. Not after losing a young boy on her watch just last week. Through blinding pain, the mobster's dark eyes locked onto hers. It was a cold, calculating stare, memorizing her features for the future. But Selena shoved her fear aside and kept digging. She had to extract the bullet, or sepsis would finish the job. Her forceps probed deeper. The man bucked against the enforcers, while someone muttered a rapid Italian prayer. Got it, Selena finally breathed. The bullet came free with a sickening sound and dropped into the mud. Now came the impossible task of stitching him closed in the pouring rain, relying only on a penlight clamped between her teeth. Her hands shook wildly from a crushing adrenaline crash. But true resilience is finding a steady rhythm when your tank is completely empty. She threaded her emergency needle, knowing every stitch had to be flawless. Too loose, and he bleeds out. Too tight, and the tissue dies. Blinded by the storm, she worked by touch alone, reading the brutal terrain of his torn chest like braille. Halfway through the procedure, his hand weakly but deliberately grabbed her wrist. Selena met his dark, studying eyes. Do not die on me, she whispered. I didn't face down loaded guns just to lose you now. A ghost of a smile touched his lips before his eyes rolled back. Is he dead? A man gasped. Unconscious, Selena replied as she tied the final stitch. Sometimes our bodies shut down to protect our minds, proving even the strongest among us have a breaking point. Sitting back, she struggled to catch her breath. He needs a hospital, she warned. This is just field medicine, not a miracle. The older man stepped closer, telling her she had saved his life. I only bought him time, Selena corrected, packing her bag. Keep him clean. If his fever hits 102, he dies anyway. What is your name? He asked. Nobody, Selena replied, standing up. I was never here. Mr. Duca will want to thank you, he insisted. That name hit her like freezing water. Massimo Duca. He was the phantom of bloody headlines and whispered rumors. She had just saved the most ruthless kingpin on the coast. In a dark world, a good deed never goes unpunished. I do not want his thanks, she said quietly. I just want to go home. The enforcer nodded. Go, we were never here either. Selena walked away into the steel maze, fighting the urge to sprint. The storm faded to a slow drizzle, and she made it 3 blocks before her legs finally gave out. Collapsing onto a damp bench under dim streetlights, the terrifying truth settled in. The blood under her fingernails belonged to Massimo Duca. The man bleeding on the docks controlled half the underworld. His name made police captains sweat, yet Selena had just stitched him together with a cheap field kit. She wanted to be sick. Instead, she kept walking toward her apartment, desperate for sleep to wash the blood away. But life rarely asks if you're tired. Just as her clothes hit the floor, her phone lit up. An explosion downtown. Mass casualties. Selena closed her eyes for 30 seconds, then dutifully put her scrubs back on. 3 blurred weeks passed before the local news casually mentioned a vague incident at the docks with 0 casualties. Someone had wiped the slate clean. It leaves us with a quiet truth. Sometimes the heaviest burdens we carry are the secrets the rest of the world pretends never happened. The police investigation dissolved, as it always does when the syndicate pulls the strings. Selena lost herself in grueling 12-hour shifts at the refugee center, surviving on microwaved food and sleeping in brief windows. The pay was awful, but the work felt pure. Unlike foreign war zones, here, a wound was just a wound. Then the sickness arrived. She blamed cafeteria food. But by Friday, she was staring at 2 stark pink lines on a pregnancy test. 26. Alone and surviving on pennies. A child was never part of her plan. Yet as she looked at that plastic stick, it became a clear reminder of a deeply human reality. We can script our lives down to the second, but destiny always arrives unannounced, forcing us to find a quiet strength we never knew we possessed. The father was a doctor she met in Jordan who had promised her marriage, only to return to a secret wife in Germany. Selena stared at the test, fighting back tears. Then she threw it away and returned to her patients. 4 months passed, and she convinced herself she could pull this off alone. She found used cribs, stretched her pennies, and let her scrubs hang loose. She was building a fragile but honest life. Then Massimo Duca walked into the clinic on a Tuesday afternoon, entirely shattering her careful peace. It's a cruel rule of the universe. Just when you think you've finally glued the broken pieces of your life back together, The past walks right through the front door to test exactly how strong you really are. Selena was stitching a boy's forehead when a commotion bled into the waiting room. The sharp click of leather shoes on cheap tile echoed like a warning. Her supervisor peeked in, his face drained of color, announcing she had a visitor. Selena stepped into the hall and found Massimo Duca standing there like he owned the building. Flanked by massive men in dark suits, the clinic had gone dead silent. He was no longer the dying ghost from the docks. He was a force of nature in a tailored suit, radiating terrifying power. True authority never needs to shout. It reminds us that life's most formidable storms don't always arrive with loud thunder. Sometimes they dress impeccably. Stand in the center of your world and simply wait for you to notice them. When his eyes locked onto Selena, a predatory spark lit up his gaze. His voice sliced through the silence. Smooth and commanding, a velvet-wrapped order to talk that sent her heart slamming against her ribs. Every instinct begged her to run, but she was tethered to the vulnerable families watching her. She tried to dismiss him, but her supervisor gave a terrified nod. Massimo's shadow loomed too large over the clinic to be ignored. She led him into the cramped break room and shut the door, sealing herself in with the danger she had tried so hard to escape. He studied her with cold intensity. We often try to outrun the weight of our history by hiding in our routines. But the choices we make in the dark will always find a way to meet us under the harsh fluorescent lights of the present. "You saved my life," he stated, dismissing her claim that she was just doing her job. He knew a skilled nurse choosing poverty wages over a hospital salary was making a deliberate moral choice. Reaching into his jacket, he made her flinch, then placed an envelope holding $200,000 on the table. When she flatly refused the cash, his expression shifted. Men like him expect everyone to have a price tag. Then his eyes dropped, and he voiced the one secret she had been guarding. "You are pregnant." The words hit her like a physical blow, her hand instinctively flying to her stomach. We build immense walls to protect our deepest vulnerabilities, forgetting entirely that a truly observant person will always see right through the cracks in our armor. Massimo tracked her panic with cold precision, deducing instantly that she was entirely alone. When she threatened to call security, his calm reminder that no guard could ever stop him landed like a stone in her chest. He stepped past her, murmuring that while he respected her pride cannot buy infant formula. Tapping the thick envelope on the table, he left his quiet guarantee and walked out. The clinic seemed to finally exhale. Left alone, Selena stared at the money. She knew she should have burned it. Instead, she shoved it deep into her bag. Our morals feel absolute when life is easy. But when the future of a child is on the line, we quickly take the devil's coin and desperately try to convince ourselves we are still righteous. Alone in her apartment, she opened the envelope. $200,000, enough to guarantee her baby's safety. It was blood money, yet she hid it in her closet. We often keep things we swear we'll never use just for the comfort of knowing they exist. 2 weeks later, breaking news hit the clinic television. A medical convoy was bombed near the Syrian border. Suddenly her phone erupted with calls. An error had placed her name on the international casualty list. She spent hours convincing her colleagues she was still breathing. But rumors have a heavy momentum. A dark rumor can travel the globe before the truth even puts its boots on. And occasionally, society finds a tragic myth much easier to accept than quiet reality. By Monday, Massimo believed she was dead. A fact Selena discovered when the clinic received $10,000 in her memory from the crime boss. She should have walked away. But that dark donation made her feel like a ghost being erased. Driven by an irrational fire, she marched straight to his fortress. His warehouse was surrounded by enough razor wire to protect a nation, standing outside the heavy gates. She knew this was exactly how ordinary people vanished, yet her finger still pressed the intercom button. A harsh voice demanded her business. Fear might keep us safely hidden, but it is our deeply rooted desire to be seen, to refuse to be written out of our own story, that ultimately pushes us to knock directly on the devil's door. Stepping into the cold, pristine world of Massimo Duca, the warehouse conversion was a masterpiece of industrial luxury. With floor-to-ceiling windows and exposed brick that cost millions, everything was designed to shrink the visitor down to size. When Selena walked into his office, the silence stretched dangerously thin. For 3 full seconds, Massimo simply stared at her, as if a ghost had just walked through his door. She was supposed to be dead. Instead, she stood there, fighting the urge to run, telling him she didn't want his memorial funds or PA donation sometimes. The hardest thing to do is walk into the lion's den to reclaim your own dignity. She completely refused to be a charitable cause. Massimo crossed the room in 3 long strides. Stopping so close, she had to tilt her head to meet his dark, intense gaze. That is when his eyes dropped to her stomach. At 17 weeks, the thin fabric of her only nice dress could no longer hide the truth. When she told him the father was none of his business, Massimo's response was sharp. She had saved his life, and in his world, that bound them together. He started reciting the bitter facts of her existence, proving he knew about her 70-hour work weeks and her freezing, broken-down studio apartment. It is a harsh truth we all learn eventually. Sometimes the people we try the hardest to push away are the only ones who truly see how badly we are drowning. He knew she was eating 1 meal a day, just to give the rest to her patients. When his fingertips brushed the dark circles under her eyes, Selena violently jerked away. In a heartbeat, Massimo's expression snapped shut, the fleeting warmth replaced by a wall of ice. He ordered his men to drive her home. She could have walked away then, but pure exhaustion forced a bitter confession from her lips. The baby's father had a wife, a secret she learned entirely too late. Massimo simply called the man a fool. Across that massive room, a silent understanding passed between them. True loneliness is rarely about being by yourself. True loneliness is being surrounded by people, yet knowing no one will catch you if you fall. Pride often becomes our heaviest burden. The connection shattered, and Massimo reminded her that when her pride finally gave out, she knew exactly where to find him. 4 months later, that pride cracked. At 26 weeks pregnant, severe preeclampsia sent her blood pressure soaring. After a terrifying night in the hospital, pumped full of magnesium sulfate, she was sent home on strict bed rest. Then came the bill for $47,000. Her bare minimum insurance barely made a dent. Selena collapsed on her bathroom floor, weeping over a brutal mathematical reality she could not escape. Life has a way of backing us into corners where sheer willpower is simply not enough to save us. She could not work the required hours and keep her baby safe. At 2 a.m, sheer desperation drove her to the closet. She pulled out the shoebox containing $200,000 of blood money, cash she had sworn never to touch, taking $50,000. She went to sleep, feeling like she had auctioned off a piece of her soul. Within 3 months, the funds vanished into hospital bills, rent, and basic supplies, leaving her terrified and completely exhausted. Then, a new envelope appeared at the refugee center. Inside was another $200,000 and a note from Massimo, calling it a debt he could never fully repay. Sometimes survival forces us to compromise the very principles we swore to protect. Staring at the money in the break room, Selena realized her own naivety. Men like Massimo Duca never forget their investments. And the proud, independent choice would have been to return it, instead with a baby due in 6 weeks and exactly $90 to her name. She kept it. Pride is a beautiful thing, but it cannot buy a warm crib. At 37 weeks, she endured 8 agonizing hours of labor. When they placed little Gabriel on her chest, a fierce, terrifying love cracked her wide open. The next day, a hospital social worker came to evaluate the single, low-income mother. Selena lied through her teeth to prove she was stable. A mother will build an entire fortress of lies if it means keeping her child safe from the cold. This is where reality truly begins to unravel. Selena carried Gabriel out of that hospital in a second-hand car seat and rode home in an Uber, returning to an apartment that suddenly felt entirely too small. The true cost of a newborn hit her like a freight train. Diapers, formula, pediatrician visits, and a tripled heating bill bled her savings dry. By week 6, half of Massimo's money was gone. Childcare cost more than she could ever earn, and she was illegally hiding a baby in a restricted building. She was drowning in the deep end. Then came the fateful knock on a Saturday morning, operating on 3 hours of sleep. She was bouncing her screaming son when the fragile world she built finally collapsed. Selena was trapped in that grueling phase of motherhood where you simply have to endure. Over Gabriel's wailing, she barely registered the knock. But opening the door, she found Massimo Duca. His immaculate suit looked absurd against her peeling wallpaper. "You are alive," he murmured, as if expecting a ghost. "Why are you here?" she yelled. "May I come in?" Every instinct screamed to slam the door, but exhaustion had hollowed her out. And pride vanishes after weeks of no sleep. She stepped aside, watching him survey her 400-square-foot life, the laundry, the bottles, the sheer chaos. "The baby," he noted. "Boy or girl?" "A boy, Gabriel," she snapped. "And he is crying because that is what babies do sometimes." Hitting rock bottom means we let the absolute wrong people through our door, simply because we are too tired to keep fighting. Selena kept swaying, doing that desperate dance parents do when nothing works. "What do you want?" she demanded. Massimo studied Gabriel's furious face and said, "Give him to me. Let me try." The request was so absurd she laughed. But her arms were burning, and exhaustion makes us reckless. She handed her son over, expecting a total disaster. To her shock, Massimo took him with steady confidence, holding the infant firmly against his chest. He walked slow, rhythmic circles around the room, and impossibly, the screaming faded into complete silence. The most dangerous man on the East Coast had just soothed her baby. "How did you do that?" she whispered. "I had a nephew," Massimo replied, his voice hollow. "A long time ago, before he died." The silence that followed was heavy, and she asked no more. Grief is a house with many locked doors, and it is best not to force your way into another person's tragedy. Massimo handed Gabriel back as if the child were fragile glass. "You need help," he stated flatly. "I am managing," she lied. "You are destroying yourself," he fired back. "How long before you collapse?" "A month. That is my problem," she insisted. "It is Gabriel's problem," he countered. "You want to be noble. But martyrs die, Selena. Then who takes care of your son?" We often trick ourselves into believing that mere survival is a victory, ignoring the cliff we are running toward. The cold truth hit her hard. "What are you suggesting?" Her voice trembled. "Come work for me," he replied calmly. "Doing medicine. I need discreet care for my people. No questions asked. Paying 3 times your clinic salary." It was a snare hiding in plain sight, an obvious, lethal trap. Working for the syndicate meant stepping into an inescapable darkness. But her son was warm in her arms. She had exactly $400 left, and rent was due in 8 days. "I need time," she said. "You have 48 hours," Massimo replied, leaving a heavy card behind. In the end, it only took her 30 hours to break. Her son needed medicine she could not afford. Pride is just an illusion, a luxury reserved strictly for people with actual options. She made the call, and Massimo answered instantly. "Yes or no?" "Yes," she breathed. "A car will get you at 8 in the morning. Bring the baby." The line went dead. The next morning, a black sedan with tinted windows waited at the curb, strapping the car seat into the back. She tried to swallow her terror, knowing she had just sold her soul to keep her child alive. For 40 minutes, the car left the city behind, slipping into a world where wealth whispered from behind heavy iron gates. As they entered an estate that felt plucked from a European dynasty, Selena felt the gravity of her new reality. The manicured gardens and intimidating architecture were designed to make a person feel incredibly small. Stepping inside, the marble entryway and sweeping staircase were lined with art worth lifetimes of labor. Massimo appeared at the top of the stairs, shedding his suit for dark jeans and a black shirt, stripped of his formal armor. The dangerous man underneath was undeniable. He descended, his eyes locking onto the child in her arms, noting only that the boy was safe. Sometimes, the most absolute prisons we ever enter are the ones that look exactly like palaces. We willingly walk into the gilded cage, trading our ultimate freedom just to feel safe for one single night. Selena pulled her infant closer to her chest. When she asked whose home this was, Massimo's answer felt like a physical blow. He told her it was hers. Starting today. The sudden shock paralyzed her, but he laid out his logic with clinical precision. There would be no exhausting commute. She was moving in. He had already prepared a medical suite, a nursery, and a lavish bedroom. When she hesitated, frozen by the loss of her autonomy, he delivered a calculated strike. Would she really choose to drag a baby through 4 hours of traffic every day? It was a masterful manipulation. He had her completely boxed in, and as she followed him up those sweeping stairs, every footfall felt like stepping deeper into an inescapable snare. He showed her a suite that dwarfed her old apartment, filled with antiques and overlooking endless gardens. The absolute most effective way to control someone is never through force, but by painting them into a corner where they gladly lock the door themselves. Massimo pushed open the door to the nursery, and all the breath left Selina's lungs. It was an absolutely perfect space, complete with a crib with organic sheets, a premium rocking chair, and a white noise machine. It was every single item she had agonizingly priced online and simply could not afford. When she asked how he possibly knew what to buy, his chillingly brief answer was that he had people for that. He watched her take in the room, explaining that she needed this luxury to properly care for her son. Selina instinctively swayed the sleeping baby, finally asking what exactly her job was going to be. His eyes turned flat and dangerously honest. She would be treating emergencies for violent men who could never walk into a hospital. She was becoming a doctor for the underworld, paid to heal trauma and forget what she saw. We slowly realized that the purest things in our lives are so frequently purchased through the darkest compromises of our moral compass. She challenged him then, asking what would happen if she simply refused and tried to leave. The heavy silence stretched the tension to its breaking point. Massimo told her she was free to walk out, but she would be leaving behind absolute safety and a vast salary she could never earn on her own. She called it a trap, but he calmly corrected her, calling it employment. As he closed the door, Selina stood alone in that flawless nursery, looking down at her sleeping child, entirely unable to recognize the shape her life had taken. She had simply tried to save a bleeding man in the rain, and now she was deeply anchored to his criminal empire. Her fierce independence had broken, leaving her to wonder if she had signed a contract with the devil, or merely found the only path to stay alive. In the brutal mathematics of sheer survival, we will almost always sacrifice the person we used to be, just to ensure that the people we love get to see another tomorrow. For 3 days, Selina kept herself locked in that lavish suite, convincing herself she was just resting and letting her baby find a routine. But a gilded cage is still a cage. Every shadow held the gaze of Massimo's guards, silent phantoms reminding her she owed a massive debt. On the 4th morning, reality knocked. A stern woman named Rosa arrived, holding a breakfast tray and a mandate disguised as an invitation. "Mr. Duca requests your presence in the medical suite," Rosa announced, her thick Italian accent leaving no room for debate. Selina tried to resist, but power like Massimo's never asks, it simply tells. Hiding from our circumstances doesn't keep us safe. It merely delays the exact moment we must finally step out and face the fire. Rosa brought real food, a sharp contrast to the stale granola bars Selina had been eating, and whisked a fussing Gabriel into her arms, calming him instantly, standing there. Selina felt completely hollow and stripped of her agency. "Eat, you are too thin," Rosa ordered, and Selina obeyed. She slipped into fresh scrubs and navigated the massive mansion. Pushing open the doors of the medical wing, she froze. This was not just a room, but a highly advanced trauma center built on blood money. When we feel overwhelmed, it is easy to let others make our choices for us, surrendering our power to survive. But reclaiming our strength always begins by walking into the room and facing what we are truly up against. Massimo stood with Antonio, a silver-haired enforcer who evaluated Selina with the cold efficiency of a man hunting for weakness. Massimo's voice lacked the warmth he had shown her child. He was now the boss. He asked if the setup met her standards, and Selina checked the perfectly organized supplies, realizing a former combat medic had designed the layout. Massimo moved to the exam table and dropped the hook. Her first patient was arriving in 20 minutes with a gunshot wound. The trap was finally sprung. When a situation appears absolutely flawless and is handed to us on a silver platter, we must pause and ask ourselves what invisible price we are actually expected to pay. Every instinct screamed at Selina to grab her child and run. "Can you handle it?" Massimo asked, his heavy gaze pinning her down. Instead of fleeing, she heard herself ordering them to get the bleeding kid onto the table. 2 guards carried the pale patient in, stepping back as Selina snapped on her gloves. The bullet had torn through muscle, leaving him bleeding for hours. As Antonio held the boy steady, Selina went to work. Her hands never shook as she stitched the torn flesh, while Massimo watched, silently measuring her worth. 40 minutes later, she demanded antibiotics. In our darkest moments of panic, our deepest habits take the wheel. When crisis strikes, We rarely rise to the occasion magically. Rather, we default to our character, revealing exactly who we are underneath the fear. "You are good," Antonio muttered, noting she was better than their last forcibly retired doctor. The room grew suffocatingly quiet as Selena stripped off her bloody gloves, and Massimo stepped closer, laying out his devil's bargain. His men couldn't go to normal hospitals, and if she kept them alive and quiet, she and her son would want for nothing. "I'm not asking you to compromise your ethics," Massimo insisted, his jaw tight. "Just your visibility." It was a brilliant manipulation, pretending she still had a moral high ground when she had already crossed the line. True moral compromise rarely happens in one massive leap. It is a slow, quiet erosion of our boundaries, neatly disguised as highly practical choices. Left alone in that blood-funded clinic, Selena tried to remember her old life but couldn't. The weeks dissolved into a blur of broken ribs, knife wounds, and extracted bullets. She never asked their names, they never asked hers. The only disruption was Massimo, who would appear like a ghost to watch Gabriel sleep, his face a mask of unspoken grief. One evening, finding him rocking her child, she asked about the nephew he once mentioned, and his eyes turned to ice. "He died because I wasn't careful enough," he confessed, handing the baby back. He had believed his power exempted his family from his violent world. We often try to undo past failures by fiercely protecting new people, but unless we learn from the root cause, unhealed guilt will just cast a dark shadow over everything we build. They always apply, especially to family. Massimo warned before vanishing. That cryptic truth opened Selena's eyes. This estate wasn't just wealthy. It was a paranoid fortress. The endless guard rotations and search deliveries made it clear that someone was hunting Massimo, and she was living directly on the bullseye. The horrific reality of this cycle of violence crashed through the doors when they carried Marco and the driver who brought her here. Now a shattered mess of burns from a car bomb meant for his boss. Selena scrambled to intubate him as blood soaked the floor. He desperately needed a hospital, but Antonio forbade it. When we build massive walls, we might keep enemies at bay. Yet those exact walls often end up trapping us inside, with the very chaos we are trying to outrun. Massimo stood in the doorway, a monument of stone, when Selena begged for a hospital. His voice cracked like a whip. If Marco went into police custody, his enemies would slaughter him within a day. "At least here he has a chance," Massimo pleaded, the word feeling completely foreign on his tongue. Selena looked at the young man bleeding out. He was someone's son, paying the bloody price for this toxic empire, making a choice that would haunt her. She demanded blood and suction for 6 agonizing hours. She worked with inadequate tools, pulling out shrapnel piece by piece. By dawn, she had somehow kept him alive. True responsibility is never about making the clean choices that let us sleep well. It is about carrying the crushing weight of the impossible ones. Massimo lingers in the shadows for 6 agonizing hours, his shirt soaked in the blood of his own subordinate, a brilliant visual metaphor for the violence he orchestrates. When Selena finally collapses, her legs giving way, she is not just mourning a patient, she is weeping for her own fractured morality. Massimo crosses the room, his touch offering a warmth that feels profoundly contradictory. The very architect of this bloodshed is now the one anchoring her to reality, showing us that in this criminal underworld, the line between savior and destroyer is dangerously thin. She is crying for the impossible choices, the blood money, and the soul-crushing weight of her new reality. Massimo offers no empty platitudes and no hollow comfort. He simply acts as a silent witness to the destruction of her former ideals. This is the tragic reality of motherhood trapped in a broken environment. The cries of her son, Gabriel, pull her back from the psychological abyss, forcing her to compartmentalize the trauma. She rocks her innocent baby, while the physical evidence of a syndicate war remains trapped beneath her fingernails. When Marco miraculously survives his horrific injuries, the narrative wastes no time. Selena immediately confronts Antonio, demanding to know the architect of this chaos, fully stepping out of her passive role and into the dangerous shoes of an investigator. The introduction of Roman Volkov shifts the story into a classic study of toxic masculinity and territorial ego. Antonio speaks the Russian boss's name with absolute venom, laying bare a 3-year conflict fueled by nothing more than pride and lost revenue. This is the inescapable cycle of violence defining the Mafia genre, where a lost shipment equals a wounded ego, which invariably leads to a deadly explosion. when Selina defends Massimo, citing the tenderness he showed her child. She falls into a dangerous psychological trap. She desperately wants to believe the mobster possesses a hidden, softer heart, but Antonio delivers a chilling dose of reality. The complexity she romanticizes is precisely the armor Massimo uses to survive his brutal existence. We watch as Massimo slowly infiltrates the quiet corners of her domestic sphere, checking on Gabriel, ordering dinner, and even stocking medical journals for Selina. These gestures feel profoundly intimate, directly challenging the monster archetype he embodies. In the heavy silence of the estate, they begin to share an unspoken understanding of what it means to be entirely exhausted by the world. It is in these fragile, quiet spaces that their defenses systematically lower. Even little Gabriel becomes an unwitting anchor, his genuine smiles rewarding the mob boss with a rare sense of peace. 2 months into this fragile sanctuary, Selina makes a critical error, believing the quiet has truly tamed the beast. She confronts him in the sterile quiet of the medical suite. The visual contrast in this scene is absolutely striking. Massimo trades his tailored, armored suits for soft denim and a dark sweater, stripping away the Mafia Don persona to reveal the deeply tired, vulnerable man hiding beneath it. When they discuss Gabriel hitting his milestones early, the silence between them stretches, thick with a shared longing for normalcy and dangerous potential. But Selina pushes too far. By gently asking about his mysterious nephew, she attempts to open a door that is violently nailed shut. Massimo's immediate emotional withdrawal is a masterclass in defensive psychology. He slams the emotional gate closed, proving that while he might crave this quiet domestic peace, his core remains heavily guarded and deeply traumatized. This confrontation cuts to the very heart of their dynamic. Selina accuses him of playing a part, of hiding his true, gentler nature from the criminal syndicate. But Massimo shatters that illusion with terrifying speed, weaponizing his physical presence and closing the distance until the threat of violence hangs heavy in the air. He reminds her that his capacity for murder is not an act, it is his fundamental truth. Yet Selina holds her ground, diagnosing his intimidation tactic with surgical precision and forcing a profound question. Is the ruthless mobster using fear to protect his empire? Or is the broken man using cruelty to protect his heart from the terrifying vulnerability of real connection? The aftermath of their collision is a perfect example of emotional avoidance. Massimo retreats entirely, rebuilding the impenetrable walls around his persona and delegating his presence to Antonio, effectively ghosting the fragile family dynamic he had just begun to nurture. Selina attempts to rationalize this isolation as professional safety, trying to bury her complex feelings under the guise of an employee contract. But Gabriel acts as the emotional truth-teller. The infant cannot intellectualize the sudden absence. He simply feels the void. His nightly tears serve as a haunting auditory reminder of the emotional wreckage left behind when guarded men flee from intimacy. The routine was broken, and the child pays the price. Rosa serves as the archetypal wise elder, delivering a harsh but necessary truth about the nature of dangerous men. They preemptively destroy connections to avoid the agonizing pain of potential loss. As Selina paces the floor with her crying son, she attempts to rebuild the lie that her presence in this criminal underworld is purely transactional, a desperate survival tactic for her baby. But the psychological reality has fundamentally shifted. The sprawling estate has morphed into a sanctuary, and the blood money feels like absolute security. She is no longer just a hostage to circumstance, but an active participant in her own moral compromise, finding a twisted sense of home. Midnight finally brought silence. Gabriel had cried himself to sleep, leaving Selina to watch his chest rise and fall. When a hesitant knock broke the quiet, she found Massimo in the hallway, looking completely stripped of his armor. He asked about the boy, lingering before offering a raw apology for his absence. "You told me I was getting too close," Selina whispered into the dark. Why? His answer laid bare the tragic reality of his world. Everyone he ever loved had been used as leverage against him, to survive the cycle of violence. He had simply chosen to kill his own heart. The thick walls we build to keep the pain out almost always serve to lock us inside. That is merely surviving, Massimo confessed, his fists clenched tightly at his sides. Selina and the child were making him forget his brutal reality, making him hunger for a peace he had abandoned long ago. Selina stepped forward, crossing the emotional divide to witness the violent war waging behind his eyes, and asked, "What do you want?" The silence stretched tight, like a wire about to snap, until he reached out, his hand cupping her face with startling gentleness. He wanted her, and he wanted a life not soaked in blood. Rational instinct screamed at Selena to run, but reason is a fragile shield against crushing loneliness. She leaned into his palm. Sometimes, we willingly choose the fire, because carrying the cold weight of the world alone is a burden no human soul was ever meant to bear. He begged her to tell him to stop, admitting he lacked the strength to pull away. The kiss began as a soft question, but quickly shattered into a desperate collision, two drowning people finally breaking the surface for air. He pressed her against the frame, offering a gentleness that contradicted the brutal world he ruled. When they broke apart, reality crashed back down. He warned her this was a mistake, urging her to take Gabriel and flee before his enemies used them as pawns. But Selena looked at the man who had been her only refuge and declared, "I am not walking away. Devotion is rarely born from pure logic. Our deepest bonds are forged not when the waters are calm, but when we actively choose to stand our ground in the very center of the storm." Relief, fear, and resignation washed over Massimo's face all at once. He kissed her again, and Selena surrendered to the fantasy that they could rewrite their destinies. But the universe rarely allows fragile illusions to last. And 3 days later, the dream shattered. It began with the sharp click of expensive heels echoing on the marble floors. A woman appeared in the doorway, exuding the polished elegance of a competing predator. "Are you the nurse?" she asked, her voice dripping with cold pragmatism. "I am Viviana Moretti. I am sure Massimo has mentioned me." He had not, and as Viviana's smile sharpened, Selena learned a painful lesson. We might try to build a quiet sanctuary, but the unresolved ghosts of our past will always find their way to our front door, demanding their due. Viviana glided into the clinic, eyeing the room with the casual disdain of an auditor finding a fatal error. "We were engaged," she announced. But this wasn't about a broken heart. It was about a broken system. To Viviana, Massimo's sudden sentimentality was a systemic threat to their entire world. "He collects broken things," she warned, her voice devoid of jealousy but heavy with calculation. "He fixes them, then moves on. But in our world, liabilities get people killed. You are a vulnerability he cannot afford." Selena ordered her out, keeping her voice perfectly steady despite the rage burning within. Viviana merely smiled, leaving Selena with the chilling realization that this wasn't a rivalry over love, it was a fight for survival. That is what makes him effective. Viviana finished, her heels clicking down the hall. She left Selena alone, allowing doubt to poison her mind. Logically, Selena knew this was manipulation, but exhausted by this dark world, she could not silence her fear. What if the warning was true? 2 hours later, she marched into his office, demanding, "Who is Viviana Moretti?" Massimo froze completely. He admitted their past engagement, stepping slowly around his desk. Selena crossed her arms, asking if she was just another broken project for him to fix and abandon. He denied it, but when she pushed him to define what they actually were, his jaw tightened and he called it complicated. "Either I matter or I do not," she challenged, until he finally looked at her and confessed that it was real. Massimo stepped closer, hands heavy on her shoulders, warning it is also dangerous. Viviana's visit proved his enemies knew Selena was his weak point. "Then protect me," she fired back, to which he insisted he was doing exactly that by hiding her, as their connection could not be public until his rivals were destroyed. When she asked how long that would take, his admission that he did not know cut deep. Selena pulled away, the uncertainty stinging worse than a lie. Were they supposed to sneak around like criminals? Massimo's face turned to stone as he admitted the injustice, prompting Selena to let out a bitter laugh. She was raising her boy in a crime family and now had to bury her own heart. Hiding our true selves for survival often builds a lonely cage of our own making. "I am tired of safe," she exploded. She had spent her life playing by the rules, only to end up broke and desperate enough to seek shelter in a world that terrified her. When Massimo reminded her she had her son to consider, Selena's voice dropped to a lethal whisper, warning him never to use her child as leverage. Everything she did was for her boy, including believing they had a future worth fighting for. The silence felt like the breathless second before a bomb detonates. Massimo stared at her, his face a storm of fear and agonizing longing. In 3 steps, he backed her against the wall. "You want to fight for this?" he growled, his tone deadly. "Then understand what you are fighting for. I am not a good man. Sometimes, the bravest thing we can do is walk into the dark with our eyes wide open." Massimo lays out his sins, presenting his violent empire as a warning. Yet he already knows she is tethered to him, a tragic paradox where we warn people away while silently begging them to stay. Selena's refusal to leave isn't just loyalty. It's the trauma bond sealing shut, trying to bandage a fractured soul just as she stitched his physical wounds. He kisses her not with romance, but with the desperation of a drowning man finding a lifeline. Sometimes, the deepest connections are born not from love, but from a shared, desperate need to simply survive the dark. Massimo's voice drops to a whisper, a stark confession in a world of deception. He cannot promise Selena safety, nor a normal future. Selena tells him he should care, but his refusal is absolute. They agree to be careful, denying enemies like the calculating Viviana any ammunition. He traces her jawline, promising to define their bond only when the danger passes. In a criminal syndicate, raw honesty is a rare currency. And sometimes the hard truth is the only genuine thing a damaged person can give. Suspecting rivals like Volkov are testing their defenses. Massimo orders heightened security around her and Gabriel. Every fortress we build to keep danger out can easily become the very cage that traps us inside. Shifting into command mode, Massimo retreats behind his desk, ordering Selena to stay confined to the estate. When she reminds him she is not a prisoner, his eyes turn to ice, labeling her a liability he cannot lose. Returning to her suite, Selena finds Rosa deeply worried, as Rosa understands the grim reality. Living under Massimo's roof makes Selena an official target. Massimo protects what belongs to him, Rosa warns, hinting at a darker ownership. The following week settles into a tense rhythm. Selena cares for Gabriel, avoiding the shadows of her new bodyguards. And at night, Massimo visits and they speak in hushed, empty tones. True freedom is not just about open doors, but knowing you are not a pawn in a dangerous game. Their stolen moments feel incredibly fragile, like glass waiting to shatter. And then the inevitable blow lands. Antonio intercepts Selena in the medical wing with a grim revelation. Viviana is actively painting Selena as a spy for Volkov. The accusations hit her like physical violence, as Viviana claims Selena seduced Massimo to infiltrate his operations, backing her lies with fabricated bank transfers and phone records. The forgery is seamless enough to plant deadly seeds of doubt. When Selena asks if Massimo knows it is a lie, Antonio's heavy silence speaks volumes. Massimo is forced to review the evidence to avoid appearing weak to his men. Trust takes years to build, but only a single well-placed lie to completely destroy everything. In the Mafia underworld, perception is reality, and right now, the syndicate perceives Selena as a mortal threat. Trembling, she asks Antonio what happens if Massimo cannot prove the documents are fake. But he does not answer, because the penalty for treason is universally understood. Seeking out Massimo, she finds him buried in files, his eyes holding a terrifying distance. When she questions how he could possibly believe she works for Volkov, he responds with chilling professionalism, noting coldly that bank transfers do not fabricate themselves. Massimo has completely compartmentalized his emotions, declaring that his personal beliefs do not matter, only what he can prove. When logic entirely suffocates empathy, love cannot survive the winter. Massimo's loyalty to his syndicate overrides his heart. He tells Selena that until her innocence is verified, she is confined to her suite under armed guard. The betrayal burns through her like acid as she realizes he is choosing the survival of his empire over their bond. Massimo raises his voice, insisting he cannot risk hundreds of lives because he is blinded by his feelings for her. But the damage is done, and bitterly, Selena throws Viviana's words back at him. He collects broken things and discards them when they become inconvenient. As she backs toward the door, she issues a final blow. He can investigate all he wants, but when he uncovers the truth, he should not expect her forgiveness. The deepest wounds come not from our enemies, but from the protectors who refuse to believe in us. Selena refuses to offer him understanding, declaring that his choice to suspect her is the ultimate betrayal. She flees his office to the safety of her suite, where Rosa takes one look at her devastated face and pulls her into a fierce embrace, choking back tears. Selena explains that Massimo is locking her up, and Rosa explains the grim mechanics of power. If Massimo shows that a woman matters more than the crime family, his rivals will use that weakness to destroy them both. Later that evening, guards appear outside her door as Antonio delivers the official order. When we build our entire existence around power, we inevitably build walls that lock out the very people who make our lives worth living. Under the new decree, Selena is totally confined to her quarters, her medical duties suspended, and isolated from everyone except Rosa and her son. It is an imprisonment dressed in luxury. As Gabriel sleeps, Selena paces the floor, spinning through desperate scenarios of escaping into the night before Massimo deems her a liability. But fleeing with a child and no money is a fool's errand, leaving her only the option to wait and trust the very man who just sacrificed her to Mafia protocol. Life often forces us into these dark corners where every choice feels like a loss, teaching us that true endurance is simply breathing through the fear. At midnight, a soft knock breaks the silence, and Massimo stands at her door, looking absolutely shattered and exhausted. Massimo tells Selena he does not want this, but he must protect the organization to keep her alive. If he openly favors her, the syndicate will turn on them all. He begs her to understand that his cold investigation is the only way to clear her name, asking for her trust, a monumental request after locking her away. Selena wants to slam the door and inflict the pain burning inside her own chest, yet beneath his stoic mask, she sees his raw desperation. He is a man torn between his crown and his heart. When she asks how long she must endure this cage, he replies, "A week, maybe 2. And the heavy silence speaks volumes about what will inevitably happen if he fails to find the truth. Massimo promises he will not let her take the fall. But for Selena, promises from a crime boss hold no weight. He reaches out, his hand hovering inches from her face, aching for contact but refusing to close the distance. Selena steps back, telling him to leave before his guards accuse him of fraternizing with the enemy. The words strike deep, and before walking away, Massimo confesses he feels more for her than he has in years, making his duty feel like poison. Alone in the dark with her son, Selena refuses to cry, realizing waiting for a savior is a losing game. By dawn, her resolve hardens. She will prove her own innocence and defeat Viviana Moretti. When the world doubts your character, you must become your own fierce advocate and refuse to play the victim. The investigation required merely 3 days to completely unravel. For 72 agonizing hours, Selena languished in her suite, transformed from a guest into a prisoner. She observed Rosa delivering meals in quiet sympathy, while little Gabriel remained entirely unaware his mother was being painted as an espionage agent. Outside her door, guards rotated with chilling military precision as she mentally mapped desperate escape routes she prayed she would never need. On the 4th morning, Antonio arrived instead of Rosa, his face a mask of carved granite, ordering, "Get dressed. Mr. Duca wants to see you." Selena's heart hammered as Rosa slipped in to take Gabriel, her eyes heavy with unspoken dread. Selena pressed a kiss to her son's forehead, committing his scent to memory for what felt like the final time, before following Antonio down into a subterranean war room. Glowing screens and maps surrounded men in sharp suits who fell dead silent at her arrival. At the head of the table stood Massimo, wearing the physical toll of profound paranoia, his clenched jaw betraying the crushing weight of his criminal empire. "Sit down," he commanded, the sharp edge in his voice forcing her compliance. She sank into the chair, fully aware these men viewed her as an unpinned grenade. As Massimo threw a folder before her containing fabricated bank statements bearing her name, $200,000 in recent deposits were all meticulously traced back to the phantom shell corporations of Roman Volkov. The numbers blurred together in a meticulously constructed fiction. "That is not real," Selena breathed, but Massimo was relentless. He dropped more documents onto the table, phone logs showing encrypted texts and surveillance photographs of her at the refugee center annotated with his daily movements. "This is fake," she pleaded. But the trap was flawlessly designed. The bank confirmed the accounts, Massimo stated coldly, noting the texts originated from her exact device. Someone cloned it, she argued, desperate to pierce his armor of mistrust. To which he simply replied, "Convince me." Those two simple words functioned as both a brutal challenge and a hidden plea, while around the room, the predatory eyes of his soldiers had already sentenced her to death. 3 enforcers watched her with the chilling stillness of apex predators, as Massimo held his fractured psyche together through sheer force of will. "I saved your life," she reminded him. "I could have let you bleed out," an older soldier scoffed, calling it a long game to earn trust. "If this was calculated," Selena's voice broke, "why fall for you?" The room held its breath, waiting to see how the boss would handle naked vulnerability. But Massimo's expression remained frozen. "Emotion is the best cover," he replied. "It makes the lie believable." The words twisted like a blade in her chest as she laughed bitterly. "You actually believe that? You think I am that good of an actress? I think you are smart enough to play the part," he stated, straightening his posture to defend his crumbling reality. Massimo argued Volkov simply exploited her, blind to his own psychological prison. Selena slammed her hands onto the table, declaring she was being framed by someone feeding his darkest fears. Paranoia keeps him alive, yet it is the very mechanism destroying his humanity. "Paranoia is about to kill you," she warned, demanding access to the raw data, because every architect of deception leaves a fingerprint. Massimo hesitated, exchanging a silent look with Antonio that spoke the unspoken language of violent men, before offering a fractured concession. She had 24 hours under strict supervision. If she could prove the fabrication, he would investigate, but if not, the unsaid consequences hung heavy in the air. Just 24 hours to untangle a masterclass in deception. It was a painfully brief window, yet more mercy than the syndicate usually allowed. Selena demanded access to their servers and a digital forensics expert, prompting Massimo to call in Marco. The driver Selena had pulled from the recent car bombing. Marco arrived, still moving with stiff caution, but his mind was sharp. And when asked if he believed she was set up, he did not hesitate, revealing his past life in cybercrime. He promised to hunt down the architect of this frame job. The basement war room transformed into a sanctuary of decryption as they ground through the hours. Marco hammered at his keyboards, chasing phantom data, while Selena applied the methodical triage she used in trauma wards, combing through the documents to hunt for the singular, fatal inconsistency that always unravels a perfect lie. The trap was a masterpiece of financial engineering. Offshore accounts were buried under multiple jurisdictions, opened 6 months prior, long before Selena met Massimo. This betrayal was either deeply premeditated or flawlessly backdated. But perfection is an illusion. Marco tapped the monitor, exposing a flaw in the cell tower data. Half the incriminatory messages pinged from the estate, but the rest connected downtown, where Selena had not been in months. Someone had cloned her device, orchestrating a digital ghost to send the damning texts, which was enough to shatter the certainty of her guilt. Selena finally drew her first real breath in 4 days, but the fragile relief died instantly as the door swung open. Viviana Moretti glided into the underground war room, draped in pristine white clothing, wearing a smile that cut like a razor. Viviana surveyed the room with immense satisfaction, presenting a tablet like a poisoned chalice and claiming it was fresh intelligence from Volkov, an audio recording of his spy. The blood in Selena's veins turned to ice as Viviana tapped the screen, and a chilling file filled the room. It was a digital clone, mimicking Selena-esque cadence with terrifying accuracy, casually detailing Mafia security vulnerabilities. Selena denounced it as a fabrication, but Viviana countered with clinical coldness, stating that voice analysis confirmed a 92% match, enough to condemn her in this subterranean court. "There is no court here," Massimo warned in a tone steeped in quiet danger. But Viviana coldly pointed out that there is always brutal, unavoidable syndicate justice. Viviana was not merely presenting evidence. She was challenging Massimo's authority in front of his war council, openly questioning whether he possessed the ruthless strength to eliminate a liability, or if emotion had made him weak. It was a venomous trap. If he protected Selena, he proved himself compromised. But if he eliminated her, Viviana won. Massimo stepped forward with predatory grace, ordering her out in a voice laced with lethal intent. Viviana held her ground, delivering one final, blistering warning. Do not come crying when Volkov uses this nurse to put a bullet in your head. As her heels clicked away on the cold concrete, the room erupted into total chaos, with his lieutenants shouting over each other, demanding decisive, bloody violence to restore the syndicate's natural order. Notice how the narrative frames this scene. The chaotic war room falls away until only Massimo and Selina remain in the humming silence, haunted by a fabricated audio tape. Massimo knows the voice is a digital forgery, yet in the ruthless ecosystem of the syndicate, perception is reality. Viviana hasn't just attacked his empire. She has weaponized his men's paranoia against him, backing him into a corner where logic dies and power demands a sacrifice. When we build our foundation on paranoia and control, the slightest tremor of doubt can force us to abandon the very people we swore to protect. Massimo claims he is choosing the empire to save them all, but he frames his betrayal as a necessary sacrifice. Wrapping his cowardice in the guise of duty, he kisses her one final time, then completely buries his humanity behind the cold mask of a crime boss. As Antonio drags Selina down into the concrete depths of the basement, the physical descent mirrors Massimo's moral collapse. He says he is sorry, but apologies without action are just empty noise. You can whisper all the apologies in the world, but your true character is always defined by the choices you make when the walls start closing in. The confinement of the windowless cell strips away all illusions, leaving Selina alone in the stifling dark. Forced to sit with the agonizing realization that her faith was misplaced, she gambled her safety on the belief that love could somehow cure a corrupted soul, only to find that the house always wins. Time dissolves into an endless loop of pacing and panic, punctuated only by the arrival of stale food and vague reassurances about her son. Believing in someone's potential to change is a beautiful thing, but betting your entire life on a promise they are not ready to keep will only ever lead to a cage. In the dark, a mother's worst fear is never about her own survival, but what her child will inherit. Selina visualizes Gabriel absorbing the violent poison of Massimo's world, a cycle of trauma passed down like a dark heirloom. Just as her despair peaks, Marco breaks the isolation, holding the digital truth that could clear her name. Yet in a corrupt system, the truth is entirely useless without power to back it up. They cannot fight. They must flee. And while every instinct screams that this sudden escape is a trap, inaction is a guaranteed execution. Sometimes, life forces you to leap blindly into the unknown, because staying in a familiar prison is far more dangerous than risking the fall. Marco risks everything to repay a debt, proving that real loyalty is earned through grace, not demanded through fear. They weave through the hidden veins of the compound, moving from the sterile danger of the syndicate down into the warm, domestic smell of tomato sauce and laundry. Rosa waits with the baby, offering a fleeting moment of pure maternal grace in a ruthless world. She pinpoints Massimo's fatal flaw perfectly. His fear simply outweighs his love. You can love someone with all your heart, but if your fear of losing control is greater than your courage to trust, you will eventually drive them away. The illusion of escape shatters exactly 3 blocks away when Viviana arrives. Not as a mere rival, but as the physical embodiment of the syndicate's inescapable reach. She speaks with the calm boredom of a predator who has already won. Marco tries to shield Selina, but the geometry of violence closes in instantly, and when they rip Gabriel from her arms, the physical pain of hitting the concrete is nothing compared to the psychological tearing of a mother from her child. A single gunshot ends Marco's redemption arc permanently, proving that no matter how hard we try to outrun our past mistakes, the consequences of walking into the dark will inevitably demand a heavy price. Inside the vehicle, the contrast is chilling. Viviana sits perfectly composed, casually discussing torture while Selina bleeds and trembles. Holding her child like a fragile shield against the horror, Viviana uses Gabriel as leverage, understanding that a mother's love is the ultimate vulnerability. This strips away the glamorous facade of organized crime, revealing the hollow cruelty beneath. The most dangerous people you will ever meet are not the ones who yell or threaten blindly, but the ones who can casually destroy your life with a quiet smile. Selina carries the crushing weight of her choices, realizing that trusting a broken man has doomed her innocent son. They arrive at a decaying warehouse, a fitting graveyard for misplaced hope. In a twisted display of psychological warfare, they hand her baby to a gentle, grandmotherly figure. It is a calculated move to show that true monsters can wear the mask of kindness. Finally, she is brought before Roman Volkov. He didn't look like a movie villain. He looked like a weary, calculating executive. The true horror lies in his pragmatic dead eyes. He isn't driven by bruised ego, but by cold systemic logic. True evil rarely looks like a monster. It usually wears a nice suit and views human life as a mere inefficiency on a spreadsheet. Selina refuses to sit despite her bleeding head, a powerful visual metaphor for her lingering defiance. Volkov does not just deal in physical violence. He traffics in psychological devastation. As Volkov unpacks his grand design, the horrifying truth comes to light. Every choice Selina thought she made out of maternal desperation was actually a variable on his spreadsheet. The crushing medical bills, the financial ruin, the serendipitous intervention of Massimo. It was all a meticulously crafted snare. When we surrender our moral boundaries for temporary security, we often find ourselves entirely at the mercy of the monsters we thought we could control. Volkov casually confessed that he deliberately ruined her life, ensuring she would run straight into Massimo's open arms because he has a weakness for broken things. Volkov sneered. The trap finally snapped shut as he demanded she become his spy, handing over every weakness in the estate. When she refused, Volkov turned on a screen showing Gabriel playing and calmly threatened to make her son an orphan, painting a grim picture of a child lost in a brutal system. Tears blurred Selina's vision, but she held them back. The cruelest people will always aim directly at what we cherish most. Yet that exact same love is the only force powerful enough to make us stand our ground. Volkov wanted something from Massimo, and he planned to use Selina as the weapon to take it, offering her new identities and freedom, while the alternative was pure darkness. If she refused, he promised to sell her and little Gabriel to underground markets that never asked questions, a fate far worse than death. The sheer horror washed over her in freezing waves, and stalling for her life. She begged for time to think. Volkov gave her exactly 10 minutes, locking her inside the office, where the security feed showed her sweet boy sleeping peacefully in his crib. The deepest love we hold for others is exactly what makes us completely vulnerable. She realized Viviana had never wanted to drive her away from Massimo, but rather corral her directly into Volkov's waiting arms. With every piece of fake evidence designed to isolate her, Massimo believed she was a traitor. Marco was dead in the street, and Gabriel was a pawn in a deadly game. Yet, instead of breaking, Selina's mind shifted into the icy focus of a trauma nurse trying to save a coding patient. She checked her pocket and felt the small miracle of Rosa's phone, missed by the guards. But dialing for help was a gamble. Calling Antonia would look like a trap. And when trust is shattered, even a cry for help sounds like a lie. In this unforgiving criminal syndicate, perception becomes reality, and Selina knew she was already a ghost to them. Massimo would look at any normal plea and see only a hollow manipulation set by a rival, so she gave him a bloody piece of the truth. Raising her phone with trembling hands, she forced her battered face into the light, letting the camera become her confessional. She spoke of Volkov, the warehouse, and Viviana's orchestrated betrayal, laying bare the horrific ultimatum: sell out Massimo's empire, or watch her son be sold to monsters. Her voice broke, but her spirit refused to shatter. The truth only rings clear when it is bought with absolute vulnerability. Through the lens, she confessed the fatal error of loving a man built for war, admitting her dangerous fantasy that she could survive his brutal life. Wiping her face, she smeared tears and blood into a tragic mask, mourning the fairy tale she had desperately chased and the innocent lives dragged into the crossfire. Then, the illusion snapped as Volkov returned. Checking his watch with the casual indifference of an executioner, she sent the file to Rosa, trusting a seasoned survivor, before hiding the device entirely. Standing up to face Volkov, she wore desperation like a shield, demanding to see Gabriel first sometimes. The bravest thing we can do is demand a sliver of humanity from those who have none. She promised Volkov the keys to Massimo's kingdom for 1 hour with her son, a beautiful, desperate lie. She planned to feed him just enough woven fiction to delay the inevitable, praying for a miracle in a room devoid of them. Volkov, seeing only a broken mother, agreed with a cold promise of violence if she dared deceive him. When they brought her to Gabriel, the sterile room became a fragile sanctuary. She pulled him close, anchoring herself to his steady heartbeat, whispering hollow promises of safety, while knowing the walls were closing in. Outside, the syndicate machinery was churning, preparing for her interrogation. True courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to stand in the pitch black for the people we love. Selena had to calculate the exact weight of betrayal, giving up enough of Massimo to save her son, without handing her lover to the Reaper. As the hour bled away, she hummed faded melodies, her mind running a maze of hopeless scenarios. While a caretaker sat by the door knitting with cold rhythm, Gabriel slept peacefully in her arms, entirely blind to the monstrous bargains his mother was making. When the door finally opened, it was not Volkov but Viviana. She drifted in like a critic examining a ruined painting, mocking Selena's wounds before sitting with chilling posture. Our most dangerous enemies are rarely the unknown monsters we fear, but the familiar faces we once welcomed. Viviana sits there, her pristine mask showing a singular hairline fracture, telling Selena that Roman will demand the truth. Her 3 wasted years playing the devoted wife to Massimo Duca, a man who discards affection like spoiled fruit, have culminated in this moment of pure vengeance. She wants his empire reduced to ash. And when Selena refuses to play the pawn, Viviana casually weaponizes a mother's love, threatening the infant. Gabriel, hurt people, and unhealed wounds will eventually bleed on those who never cut us. With a hollow smile, Viviana seals the fate of Massimo and everyone in his estate, leaving no room for mercy. Selena is handed an impossible scale, weigh the life of her child against the lives of an entire household. When she reminds Viviana of Marco, murdered in the street like stray collateral, Viviana dismisses him as a broken tool. When we start treating people as mere instruments for our own ambitions, we lose our own humanity in the process. Moments later, Volkov brings in his men, setting up cold, clinical lights and microphones. A stern woman takes Gabriel from Selena, who holds him tightly for one agonizing second before letting go. Her arms left echoing with emptiness as Volkov instructs her to sit and the recording begins. Volkov makes the stakes crystal clear: any deception will be paid for by Gabriel. The red light of the camera blinks to life, a mechanical eye capturing her desperation as he begins with the basics. Drawing out the daily routines and guard numbers, Selena answers with robotic precision, carefully measuring out the truth while searching for a blind spot in his knowledge. But then he probes for Massimo's sanctuary, the safe room, and giving up that location guarantees Massimo's death. She sidesteps, claiming ignorance, pointing out that prisoners are rarely given tours of their captors' fortresses. Trust is a house built brick by brick, and survival often depends on knowing which walls are hollow. Volkov pivots to the guard rotations, and Selena must act fast. Selena feeds him a calculated lie, claiming the guards shift exactly every 6 hours, when in reality, Massimo rotates them every 8 hours at unpredictable intervals. It is a psychological masterstroke, giving Volkov a schedule that will march his men right into a chaotic collision. She weaves truth and fiction together like a surgeon operating in total darkness, fully aware that a single slip of the scalpel means death. Life demands this kind of careful balance. We must learn to steer through treacherous waters by giving away just enough of ourselves to survive, without losing our core truth. 2 hours pass before Volkov calls a break, offering food she cannot stomach, and praises her stoic composure, mistaking her silent terror for cold resilience before shifting his attack. Volkov demands to know Massimo's deepest fears, forcing Selena to tread lightly, explaining that the loss of his nephew shattered something inside him, leaving behind a man who calculates every emotional risk. But Volkov pierces her defense, pointing out that protecting her was no calculation, it was raw emotion. When she feigns ignorance, Volkov presses a button, revealing a monitor where Gabriel screams in the arms of a stranger. The agony of a mother unable to soothe her child is a visceral horror, teaching us that true love is our greatest vulnerability, yet also the anchor that keeps us human. Her throat tight with unshed tears, she admits that Massimo cares far more than is safe. Selena admits that when Massimo looks at Gabriel, he sees a fragile innocence worth defending. But when he looks at her, she cannot bring herself to speak the word redemption. So Volkov finishes the thought for her. He understands the profound tragedy of the Mafia archetype, the intoxicating fantasy that a monster can simply choose to become a man. Volkov shuts off the monitor, silencing Gabriel's cries in an instant, and asks the ultimate question. Would she save Massimo or her son? Her answer is swift and absolute. She would let the entire world burn to keep Gabriel safe. The purity of a mother's devotion strips away all complex moralities, leaving only the primal need to protect one's own. And satisfied, Volkov accepts her truth. Volkov announces his men will strike in 3 hours, and when Selina protests, reminding him of their deal, he coldly twists his promise. Gabriel will be sold to a quiet, wealthy family, while she is discarded as a loose end. She is dragged down into the rotting bowels of the building, the air thick with mold and the metallic tang of fear, and thrown into a makeshift cell where 5 other women huddle like broken statues. An Eastern European woman looks at her with vacant, haunted eyes, guessing correctly that they took her baby too. Evil thrives not just in grand acts of violence, but in the bureaucratic, quiet commodification of human life. They force mothers into compliance, only to sell them off to the highest bidder. The woman explains that their children are kept nearby, displayed on monitors to enforce absolute obedience. The realization washes over Selina in a suffocating wave. This is not a simple mafia dispute, but an industrial machine of human suffering, where Volkov is harvesting families. The woman notes with a deadened voice that their sale depends entirely on market demand, showing how hope can be systematically starved out of us if we let the darkness dictate our worth. Selina knows the false information she gave Volkov will soon trigger a bloodbath, leaving Gabriel trapped in this underground purgatory. But when she asks for an exit, the women simply laugh and tell her death is the only way out. Selina scans the reinforced concrete and steel, searching for a single flaw, and her fingers find 2 forgotten bobby pins in her hair. Her mind flashes back to a chaotic war zone in Damascus, where an eccentric security expert taught her the art of lockpicking. She bends the wire, her hands trembling violently against the cold metal of the door mechanism. And despite one of the women questioning her futile attempt, Selina refuses to surrender. Resilience is often born in our darkest, most confined spaces. When the world locks us in, we must forge our own keys. Slowly the pins find their purchase, and the Eastern European woman makes her swear to save her 3-year-old daughter. Selina makes the impossible promise, driven by shared agony. Just as the heavy lock clicks open, the air shifted, and Selina froze, listening to distant echoes of chaos, warning the women to flee when the violence began. She slipped into the dark warehouse corridors, her head throbbing, but primal adrenaline steered her through the shadows. By pure luck, she found little Sophia first, sleeping in an unsecured room, and gathered the girl close, knowing silence was their only survival currency. 3 doors down, she found her actual target. The caretaker sat by Gabriel's crib, her needles pausing as her eyes widened in shock. Selina's voice dropped to a terrifying whisper as she demanded her son, laying bare the fatal stakes of the room. A mother backed into a corner will gladly burn down every rule of civilization to protect the innocent. Selina realizes they are marked for death. Holding 2 innocent children as her anchor, she pleads with an old woman, appealing to the universal instinct of motherhood. And the woman cracks, handing over a key card. It is a flicker of humanity in a cold underworld, and Selina runs, the weight of the children burning her arms as a physical manifestation of her burden. The hallway stretches out like a nightmare, ending in a service door. But when she swipes the card, she gets a red light access denied. The footsteps close in behind her, echoing her inescapable reality, proving that even in our most desperate moments, salvation often depends on the quiet mercy of strangers. Driven into a corner, Selina braces to fight with nothing but raw, maternal desperation. But the door kicks open from the outside, and Antonio bursts in, weapon blazing, cutting down the threat. He hauls her into a waiting convoy of black vehicles, tires screaming against the asphalt as they tear into the night. When Selina asks how they found her, the answer reveals the syndicate's internal clockwork, a leaked video from Rosa, a dying man's confession, a desperate trace. Antonio warns her that Mr. Duca is coming, bringing absolute ruin with him, and blood will flow tonight. He looks at her head wound, a physical marker of her sacrifice. But Selina just holds the children tightly. True survival often forces us to ignore our own bleeding, just to keep the people we love breathing. Antonio states the cold reality of the streets. Volkov wanted a war, and now the gates are wide open. The vehicles slide into an alleyway, joining Massimo's fully mobilized army, and then Massimo steps into the frame. He is not just a man in black tactical gear. He is the personification of vengeance, his hands stained with the blood of the outer guards. When he spots Selina through the glass, his stone facade shatters entirely in relief. Rage and terror collide in his eyes. He pulls her from the car, framing her face with trembling hands to anchor himself to reality as she tries to confess and apologize for breaking under torture to save the children. But Massimo stops her, his thumbs brushing her tears. The tragedy of their dynamic is that he realizes his failure too late, and trust, once broken by paranoia, requires a monumental effort to rebuild from the ashes. Massimo makes a chilling vow, promising to erase every soul in that warehouse who dared to harm her. A classic protector's rage, toxic and absolute. He orders her to stay hidden, but Selina refuses, refusing to be a passive damsel waiting in the wings. She understands the dark currency of this world. Volkov holds video evidence of her forced confession, and if those tapes leak, her truth is buried forever under digital lies. She demands to destroy the recordings herself, and Massimo hesitates, but the logic is undeniable. Evidence is a dangerous weapon that must be controlled. He reluctantly allows it, ordering his men to strap a heavy tactical vest over her blood-stained clothes and handing her a weapon. She is no longer just a survivor fleeing violence. She is an active participant in her own reclamation. Selina checks the magazine of her weapon, a reflex born not from malice, but from her past in field hospitals where medicine often fell short. She understands anatomy, and now she understands survival. Massimo's men move like a localized hurricane, hitting the fortified warehouse with 30 soldiers, catching Volkov's guards entirely off guard and outgunned by Massimo's surgical precision. Every shot Massimo takes is coldly calculated, with no wasted motion, only the brutal efficiency of a man dismantling an obstacle. Selina moves within their protective formation, surrounded by the deafening roar of gunfire and the choking scent of gunpowder, making her descent into the underworld by walking right through the fire. Sometimes the only way out of hell is to march directly through the center of it. They push deeper into the belly of the beast, with secondary teams clearing the holding cells and pulling terrified women from the dark. While Massimo's core group reaches the executive level then, Viviana steps into the corridor holding no weapon, armed only with a predatory, poisonous smile. She plays her psychological games, taunting Massimo about Selina giving up his secrets, but Massimo does not even break his stride. He knows why she did it, and his forgiveness is absolute. Viviana tries to use Volkov's name as a shield, warning that killing her will ignite an unwinnable war, but Massimo simply raises his weapon, declaring he is already in that war. Selina intervenes, recognizing that killing Viviana buries the location of the blackmail tapes, proving that true power is not just having the ability to strike, but having the wisdom to know when to stay your hand. Massimo lowers his weapon, offering Viviana a razor-thin bargain. Take them to the recordings. And she walks. She knows he is likely lying, but the survival instinct overrides her loyalty, and she leads them through the very corridors where Selina was previously dragged as a victim. They arrive at the digital nervous system of the criminal empire, a cold room filled with humming servers, where Massimo orders his men to tear it all down. They smash hard drives and plant explosive charges, reducing the surveillance state to plastic and wire, while Viviana watches, mocking their primitive methods and pointing out the off-site cloud backups. When Massimo demands the location, she refuses, clinging to her last scrap of bargaining power like a life raft. But she misunderstands the dynamic. A threat only works if your opponent still values your life above their own destructive rage. The shot rings out, and Viviana falls. The human mind adapts to trauma in terrifying ways, and Selina feels only the cold satisfaction of a monster removed from the board. But the cycle of violence refuses to stop at one body. Massimo barks orders to erase the digital trail as explosions rumble deep below. Volkov is burning the evidence. Massimo drags a breathless Selina up the smoke-choked stairwell, refusing to let her succumb to the flames, and they burst onto the roof. There sits Volkov, rotors spinning, offering a mocking wave from the cockpit, prompting Massimo to raise his weapon. Escaping one fire often just means stepping directly into the sights of another. Volkov holds up a screen showing the ultimate leverage. Down below, a man stands by Gabriel's car with a detonator, and the ultimatum echoes from the speakers to take revenge or save the boy. Massimo freezes, his finger taut on the trigger, as Selena watches him weigh blood against innocence. In a rare moment of grace, he lowers his gun, choosing life. But Selena is not bound by his code and fires 3 rapid shots. The glass shatters. Volkov recoils, and the machine plummets into the night sky in a fiery ruin, leaving Massimo staring in shock. Selena's voice trembles as she claims it was a bluff, gambling her child's life on the arrogance of men. Sometimes, the most desperate choices we make are simply blind leaps of faith in the dark. Selena admits she would have lived with the consequences if she were wrong, her hands shaking violently. Massimo drags her toward the stairs as the building groans and collapses, his men holding back the inferno just long enough to escape. They spill into the alley and find Gabriel perfectly safe. The detonator was indeed a bluff, a phantom threat born from the Mafia's reliance on fear. Selena collapses into the back seat, sobbing uncontrollably as the emotional dam finally breaks. And Gabriel awkwardly pats her face as Massimo holds them both, whispering that the nightmare is over, but true safety is an illusion in this life. And while a physical fire might turn a building to ash, the secrets hidden within its digital ghosts have the power to burn forever. Taking off the head of the snake does not erase the venom. Volkov's syndicate is fractured, but vengeance is a weed that grows quickly in the dark. Still, Selena allows herself to believe Massimo's lie just to survive the night. They arrive at a remote safe house 40 miles away, a sterile cabin smelling of pine, built for disasters no one wants to name, where Rosa waits with the heavy exhaustion of a woman who has mourned too many men. She takes the baby with practiced ease, scanning Selena's battered face, and offers not empty pity but action, in moments of profound trauma. The most healing thing another person can provide is simply a steady hand, and a quiet space to slowly put the pieces back together. Rosa stitches the scalp wound with the grim efficiency of a battlefield medic, urging Selena to sleep. But the body remembers the war long after the guns stop firing. The adrenaline crash is a physical weight, leaving Selena trembling as Rosa hands her a warm mug, a small anchor to pull her back to the land of the living. Sitting on the edge of the tub, Selena finally looks at her own reflection and sees hollow eyes and bruised skin. But more importantly, the psychological armor she was forced to forge. She became something ruthless to survive. The tragic truth of survival is that the shields we build to protect ourselves often become heavy cages, leaving us to wonder if we will ever be soft enough to truly feel human again. Massimo operates like a wartime general, juggling phones to control the narrative. And while the news labels the inferno an industrial accident, the underworld knows the truth. A power vacuum has opened, and violence will ripple outward like stones skipped across a black lake, with a staggering cost of survival. 11 men dead, dozens injured, and Viviana reduced to dental records in a cold morgue. The rescued women are shuffled off to silent agencies, and Selena listens to this grim accounting with total detachment, observing how the syndicate functions by turning human blood into mere statistics on a ledger of pride. When we detach ourselves from the emotional weight of our actions, we slowly lose the very humanity we are trying so desperately to protect. Selena wrestles with a dark revelation. She executed a man and felt nothing but satisfaction, a hollow triumph that should terrify her but doesn't. Massimo appears, wearing the invisible weight of his broken empire, and asks if she is okay, a useless metric when you have crossed a moral event horizon. She demands an end to the charade. No more half-truths or toxic protection masquerading as love, wanting the raw reality no matter how much it stings. Recognizing her shift from pawn to partner, he leads her out to the freezing porch. Demanding the absolute truth is easy, but carrying the heavy burden of that truth, once it is finally handed to you, is the real test of a person's character. Standing in the cold, Massimo strips away the illusions, revealing that Volkov's digital backups hold the footage of Selena's coerced confession. If those files leak, the vultures of the criminal hierarchy will circle, framing Massimo as weak, a king compromised by his own heart. In the brutal logic of the Mafia, weakness demands blood, and Selena realizes she and Gabriel would become walking targets, mere pawns used to dismantle a throne. Massimo looks at her and offers the ultimate sacrifice, giving her the choice to walk away completely with new names, clean money, and total erasure. True love is not about keeping someone trapped in your burning house, but having the courage to unlock the door and giving them the freedom to survive the winter outside. The offer of a clean slate hangs in the frigid air, heavy as an iron door. Massimo presents a terrifying binary. Selina can flee, giving her son a pristine existence far from the syndicate. But this safety requires erasing a father from a son's life, leaving a permanent void. Massimo refuses to manipulate her, offering the unvarnished reality of what staying demands, choosing the monster along with the man. The most authentic choices we make are the ones that force us to abandon our perfect visions of the future. True commitment often means embracing the shadows just as much as the light. The bitter wind cuts through Selina's borrowed coat, a physical manifestation of her internal chill as she reflects on her time in war zones. A period she once wore as a badge of honor. She speaks of displaced families and the crushing weight of survivors' guilt, exposing a harsh psychological truth. Her bravery in those camps was merely rented, shielded by the comfort of an inevitable exit strategy. Even when she saved Massimo on the docks, a quiet escape route was waiting in the back of her mind. We often build emergency exits to protect our hearts from true vulnerability, but real courage begins when we realize that stepping fully into life requires giving up the illusion that we can remain perfectly untouched. Massimo steps into her space, his proximity radiating a dangerous heat, as Selina confesses her perceived cowardice, framing her medical heroics as mere trained instinct. But Massimo dismantles her self-doubt, reminding her of the ultimate transgression she committed to protect her family, taking a human life without hesitation. When Selina admits with quiet horror that she felt nothing when pulling the trigger, she encounters the chilling reality of survival. She is horrified by her own numbness, viewing it as a monstrous transformation, but in truth, it is the mind's ultimate shield. We often judge ourselves harshly for the emotional calluses we develop during our hardest trials. Yet those exact calluses are what allow us to carry the people we love through the fire safely. Every casualty, every calculated risk that ended in tragedy, still breathes down Massimo's neck. He articulates a grim philosophy of power. You either learn to bear the crushing weight of consequence, or you let it shatter you entirely. As he gently traces her cheek, he poses the central thesis of their union. They are both fundamentally fractured. So the only choice left is whether they shatter in isolation or piece themselves together. Selina looks at the collateral damage, the rescued lives, the violent reality, and makes her final pivot by demanding the absolute removal of all protective filters and refusing to be treated as fragile glass. If you are going to stand by someone in their darkest hour, you must demand the absolute truth. Selina demands full access to the darkest corners of his existence, realizing that loving a fractured person means accepting the entirety of their being, the protector and the predator. The cautious observer who kept one foot out the door died the moment violence found her. Massimo warns her of the unforgivable lines he has crossed, his voice tight with the fear of finally being seen. And when they press their foreheads together, breathing the same winter air, it is a sealing of fates. We all reach a point where we stop outrunning our pasts and turn to face the music. And true acceptance in any relationship requires stripping away our carefully curated masks. Once you decide to stop running, you find that the hardest paths lead to the strongest love. You and I have seen how trauma isolates people, but here in the quiet aftermath it acts as binding glue. Selina acknowledges the absolute certainty of disaster. This life guarantees nothing but pure chaos, yet she embraces it. Sitting quietly beside him with the dark humor of a trauma nurse, her acceptance draws a rare, genuine smile from a man who had long forgotten how to soften. They walk back inside not as a fairy tale couple holding hands, but as two exhausted, battle-tested equals matching stride. The household slowly stitches itself back together over the next 3 days, through sheer routine and quiet comfort. It shows us that after our world falls apart, healing does not arrive through grand romantic gestures. Peace is rebuilt through the mundane, silent rhythms of shared meals and quiet mornings. The machinery of the syndicate swiftly erases the bloody evidence, and the city turns a blind eye, as cities always do. While Selina relearns the simple act of breathing, without panic, the rescued women slowly piece their shattered lives together, and true to his word, Massimo completely dismantles the walls between them. He lays bare the financial nervous system of his empire, showing her the illicit ledgers and laundered funds that pay for their security and comfort, forcing her to understand that knowledge equals complicity. To know the source of the money is to share the burden of its sins. We cannot enjoy the shade of a tree while pretending we do not know where its roots draw their water. Massimo guides her deeper into the abyss, exposing the violent enforcement required to maintain his throne. The bitter pill of power, showing that order in the criminal underworld is heavily subsidized by fear and controlled brutality. Selena watches her final, desperate illusions fade into dust. And when she asks how he carries the weight of such ruthlessness, his chillingly pragmatic answer is that, without a king imposing harsh rules, the violence becomes a random, uncontrollable fire. He confesses his own villainy without defense, claiming only to be the lesser evil, the rawest truth he has ever offered. Survival requires accepting that the world is not split into good and evil, but rather into difficult, heavy choices. 2 weeks pass, and while the physical damage to the estate is repaired, the psychological toll is a heavy shroud, with 11 empty chairs remaining at the table. During a quiet memorial in the gardens, Massimo strips away the romantic myth of the Mafia soldier, speaking of the fallen not as invincible warriors, but as ordinary people with families, forcing the surviving crew to look the human cost directly in the eye. When Antonio reports that the grieving families have been compensated with triple the standard payout, Massimo offers a bleak correction. Knowing money cannot replace a father, they have simply attached a price tag to human sorrow. We often try to throw resources at our pain, hoping to balance the ledger. But some debts of the heart can never be settled with a check. Antonio questions her loyalty, highlighting a raw truth: the men need a symbol to prove the blood they spilled had meaning. Later, Massimo finds her in the quiet sanctuary of the nursery, leading her to his office to present the ultimate mirror, the unedited footage of her interrogation. He presses play, forcing them both to witness her darkest hour, watching in heavy silence as the digital Selena weaves truth with deception, desperately trying to shield Massimo while keeping her child alive. Watching your own trauma replayed is a unique kind of torture, yet facing our shameful reflections head-on is often the only way to rob them of their power. We cannot heal from a poison until we are brave enough to look at exactly what we swallowed. The aftermath is where the psychological autopsy begins. As Massimo watches the footage of Selena breaking under torture and realizes the brilliance of her survival, she fed them 4 critical pieces of false information, throwing off guard rotations by 3 hours and faking safe room locations, building a fortress of lies to protect him even under agonizing pressure. When she accuses him of choosing his empire over her, Massimo finally drops his armor, admitting he is a coward not in the face of bullets, but in the face of emotional vulnerability. He built his criminal life to avoid giving anyone the power to destroy him, and her love terrified him. We build walls to keep out the pain, only to realize we have locked out the light, and true strength is letting someone pass the gate. Massimo takes her hand, dropping the heavy mask of toxic masculinity he has worn for years, admitting his terror and realizing that pretending to be fearless is not actual strength. He confesses his love for Selena and Gabriel, calling them dangerous because losing them would break him in ways bullets never could. Selena jokes that he sounds like he is confessing to a crime, and he admits violence has always been easier than emotional honesty. When she kisses him, she pours her unspoken fears into the touch. He cannot promise a safe future, but she vows to fight for their family. True strength is not found in impenetrable armor, but in the courage to risk your heart in a dangerous world. 3 months later, a fascinating psychological shift happens in Selena as she casually treats a dislocated shoulder. Fully adapted to the constant cycle of violence, medical emergencies within a criminal syndicate are now her daily routine. And she knows Massimo's men, by name, understanding who is one bad choice away from an early grave. She even trains Rosa in basic triage to share the burden of survival, while Gabriel takes his first steps in the gardens. An innocent boy growing up under the watchful eyes of heavily armed guards, we possess an incredible capacity to adapt to any environment. But we must always be mindful of the darkness we slowly begin to accept as normal. For Gabriel, forgetting the bloody warehouse is a necessary lie. But Massimo cannot forget. His nightly ritual of watching his son sleep is a desperate trauma response to confirm his family is breathing. When he asks Selena if this compromised life makes her happy, she hesitates, because the traditional dream of a safe life is gone. Instead, she finds purpose in the shadows, saving lives that hospitals ignore, and is fiercely loved by a complicated, dangerous man, making it all feel necessary. Real happiness rarely looks like a perfect photograph. Often it is carefully built out of the broken, messy pieces of life that we simply refuse to throw away. Selena admits that while happy might be the wrong word, she finally feels whole. Her fragmented identity, the nurse, the protective mother, and the woman who fell for a dangerous man, has aligned. And by choosing this messy reality over a safe illusion, she shatters the expectation that love must be painless. Stand in the doorway. Two damaged souls stubbornly refusing to let each other fall. While outside, armed guards patrol the dark perimeter as a reminder of the relentless cycle of violence. Chasing a flawless existence is a trap. And finding a space where your broken pieces can exist together without apology is far more valuable than any superficial vision of perfection. As new threats gather, Selena embraces a rare moment of peace. Not seeking redemption, but simply believing broken things can lock together and become unbreakable. They have dismantled each other to build something new in the ruins. When Gabriel stirs, Selena knows she must eventually teach him the heavy truth of his origins and explain how love and survival can become the exact same thing in a brutal world. When you strip away all pretense, raw authenticity is the greatest gift you can offer, as an imperfect reality shared with someone who truly sees you is always stronger than a beautifully constructed lie. Someday, Selena must teach her son to survive his family's violent legacy without being consumed by it. But tonight, he is safe. As the couple retreats to their room, the old emotional distance is gone, and despite enemies plotting outside, they carve out a sanctuary. Massimo pulls a worn velvet box from his drawer, admitting he was waiting for the perfect moment, only to realize that in their volatile world, a flawless moment will never arrive. He reveals a simple, elegant ring, proving that we spend so much time waiting for the stars to align before making a choice. But the perfect moment is simply an illusion. You cannot wait for the storm to pass. You just have to claim the present. Massimo rejects traditional marriage, framing it as paperwork that makes Selena a legal target, and instead asks her to belong to him, completely a display of vulnerability disguised as syndicate strategy. Selena laughs, asking if it is a proposal or a threat, and points out his terrible sense of romance, making the scene feel entirely genuine. The understated ring is highly symbolic, built to endure chaos, mirroring their relationship, and when she slips it on and accepts the danger, Massimo embraces her with desperate relief. True commitment does not require a formal title or legal paper to be valid. It simply requires two people making the conscious, unwavering choice to face a dangerous world together. Outside, the criminal syndicate grinds forward and new threats gather. But inside, we find a portrait of fragile peace. A child sleeps, a friend hums in the kitchen, and two flawed people rest between disasters. This peace will not last, because in the cycle of violence, nothing ever does. But for tonight, standing in the ashes of their past, it is enough. Love is not about playing the hero or waiting to be rescued. Sometimes, true love simply means choosing to tightly hold someone's hand when the world catches fire, trusting that whatever comes next, you will not face the flames alone. Selena learned this lesson through blood and desperate hope, and is now prepared to live it every day, for as long as their volatile life allows. The narrative leaves us lingering on one powerful word. In a world obsessed with limitless power, finding contentment in having enough is a radical act of rebellion. We often spend immense energy chasing the illusion of having it all, seeking flawless relationships or perfectly secure futures. But perhaps the highest form of peace is looking at the messy, unpredictable reality right in front of you, and simply choosing to be grateful for it. Recognizing that you have enough is the ultimate victory, and it is infinitely more than most people ever manage to find. Selena Val's story teaches a powerful lesson about courage and compassion in moments when walking away would be easier. At the beginning, Selena is exhausted, soaked by rain, and simply trying to get home after a long shift when she hears violence at the docks. Every reasonable instinct tells her to run. Yet when she sees a wounded man bleeding out, her training and humanity take over. She chooses to save a life. This moment is meaningful because Selena does not ask whether the injured man is good or bad. She does not know his history, his crimes, or his power. She only sees a human being dying in front of her. This teaches an important educational lesson. Compassion should not depend on whether someone is easy to love or morally perfect. In crisis, the first duty of humanity is to protect life. However, the story also shows that good actions can lead to complicated consequences. By saving Massimo Duca, Selena is pulled into a dangerous world of crime, loyalty, secrets, and violence. Her choice was morally right, but it was not simple. This makes the story more mature and realistic. Sometimes doing the right thing does not make life easier. Sometimes it brings new burdens. Selena's journey also teaches that courage is not only found in dramatic battles. It is found in a nurse working through exhaustion, a mother protecting her child, and a woman refusing to surrender her dignity even when surrounded by powerful men. She is not fearless. She is often terrified, but she keeps moving because someone needs her. For viewers, the lesson is clear. Real courage is not about power. It is about choosing humanity when fear tells us to stay silent. Selena proves that one act of compassion can change many lives, but it also reminds us that every choice carries responsibility.